All right, so are you ready to get inside the head of Donald Trump?
I am definitely ready.
That's what we're doing today.
Sounds good.
We're taking a deep dive into this massive interview that he did with Joe Rogan.
Wow.
Just to be clear, we're not here to endorse him or to bash him or anything.
Right.
We're just here to try to understand his perspective in his own words.
I think that's important.
From the source.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because I think we get like this unfiltered look at how he thinks, which is crucial for understanding his appeal.
Yeah, this is not a carefully staged press conference, right?
Exactly.
This is him just talking.
It's on Rogan.
To Rogan, yeah.
Yeah.
So he gets into everything. China, windmills, you name it.
Absolutely.
Let's start with how he describes his jump from the Apprentice boardroom to the Oval Office.
Yeah, okay.
He actually calls it surreal.
Interesting.
Like he was living two separate lives.
Yeah, I think that outsider status is key to understanding his policies because he really contrasts his comfort in like the New York business world with the stiffness of Washington.
Yep.
He felt like he was forced to appoint all of these established politicians simply because they'd been vetted,
right,
calling a lot of them stiffs who just avoid controversy.
So he kind of walks in distrustful of the system already.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that seems to color how he approaches governing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that disdain for the swamp, as he calls it, is central to his appeal to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Some voters see it as, inexperience, but others love that he's a disruptor.
Right.
So you can see both sides there.
Yeah.
But this outsider perspective, I think, gets really interesting when you apply it to his policies.
Okay.
Particularly on China.
Oh, because he's both admiring and deeply suspicious of them.
Exactly. He repeatedly calls President Xi Jinping brilliant for controlling 1.4 billion people.
With an iron fist.
With an iron fist.
Yeah, it's his phrase.
And then he slams China for stealing our chip business.
Yeah, through unfair trade practices.
Right.
And to protect American companies, he says he would have slapped a 100% tariff on Chinese electric cars if needed.
Wow.
So that America First stance is a big part of his platform, isn't it?
Huge. Yeah. It resonates with voters who feel like globalization has hurt American workers.
Yeah.
That China's playing dirty.
And those voters are, especially in like manufacturing areas, hit by job losses, right?
Absolutely. Areas that have been
Rust Belt.
Hollowed out. Yeah, the Rust Belt, exactly.
But then, it raises questions about the feasibility of reversing globalization in such a deeply interconnected world.
Right. Can you really
go back?
Go back, yeah.
And then there's the media.
Oh, boy.
Trump seems convinced that they're out to get him.
Yeah.
He brings up these things, the very fine people hoax, the bloodbath hoax, as proof.
Right.
He says they twist his words. Let me give an example.
Yeah.
A comment about the auto industry got spun into a threat. So this fake news narrative is really powerful for a certain type of voter.
Yeah.
It feeds into this existing distrust of mainstream media.
Yeah.
And positions Trump as the only source of truth.
The only one who can tell it like it is.
Right. So the internet shows like Rogan's become alternative information hubs for these voters.
Right. So that could be good for his campaign in a way because he's reaching audiences beyond just, those who tune into traditional news, right?
It's a much wider audience potentially.
But it also deepens the divide between us and them, right?
Totally.
It reinforces this kind of us versus them mentality that has become so central to American politics. And this ties into his claims about election integrity, which is another major policy focus.
Right.
He remains fixated on the 2020 election.
Yeah, he's not letting go of it.
Not at all. He insists that mail-in ballots are problematic and that voter ID is crucial.
And he even says Elon Musk agrees with him about the need for paper ballots.
Oh, wow. Bringing in Elon into the mix.
And he's really upset about Gavin Newsom's bill in California that prohibits poll workers from asking about voter ID.
I see.
Now, most listeners probably don't even know the specifics of that bill, do they?
Probably not. This is where the deep dive format can be really helpful,
right,
because that bill was highly controversial.
Right.
Opponents argue that it could increase the risk of voter fraud.
Okay.
Supporters claim that it was designed to suppress voting among certain demographics.
So it was a really hot button issue.
Yeah, and Trump tapping into this issue, even at a state level, shows how important this election integrity narrative is to his base.
Yeah, he's essentially telling them their votes are under threat.
Right.
Which is a really powerful motivator for people.
Huge motivator. It mobilizes supporters who believe that the system is rigged against them.
Exactly.
Now let's move on to environmental regulation.
Okay.
Trump boasts about cutting red tape,
Right.
claiming that he helped businesses get environmental permits.
Even when they were facing objection.
Even when facing objections.
Classic pro-business Trump.
Right. He sees regulations as job killers.
Exactly.
Which resonates with voters who feel overregulated and who believe that, environmental concerns are often overblown.
Mm-hmm.
But then he takes what seems to be a contradictory stance
Yeah.
and bashes windmills as an environmental disaster.
He claims that they rot after a few years, that they create eyesores.
Mm-hmm.
And he even throws in this baseless claim about them causing cancer.
Wow.
So it's like he's appealing to two completely different groups with those stances.
That's the interesting thing about Trump. He manages to tap into these various anxieties, even if they seem contradictory.
Yeah.
So this windmill critique appeals to voters who distrust what they see as elite environmentalism, particularly in rural areas where these turbines are popping up.
Right.
So he's feeding into their sense that their way of life is under attack.
It's almost like he's speaking a different language to each segment of his base
Precisely.
to appeal to everyone.
Yeah, it's a masterful, if sometimes confusing, form of political communication.
It's fascinating.
It is. It's really evident when you look at his foreign policy, too.
Yeah.
He emphasizes strength and dominance on the world stage.
He loves to say that other leaders both respected and feared him.
Yeah, exactly. And he argues that, his toughness prevented conflicts. And contrasts his approach with Biden's, who he claims has emboldened adversaries like China and Russia.
Right. So he's playing on that peace through strength idea.
Exactly. A concept that resonates with voters who view the world as a dangerous place where only a decisive leader can keep America safe.
Yeah.
You think about Ronald Reagan and his approach to the Soviet Union.
Right.
It's a similar kind of messaging.
So, he tells a story about threatening tariffs on French wine and champagne.
What?
Unless Macron dropped a digital tax that targeted American companies.
Wow.
He says Macron caved within about 2 minutes.
Well, whether or not that anecdote is completely accurate or not, I think it plays into the image that he's constructing.
Yeah.
He wants to be seen as a tough negotiator.
Right.
Someone who puts American interests first.
Even if it ruffles some feathers.
Even if it ruffles some feathers.
And that probably resonates with voters who are tired of seeing America get pushed around on the world stage.
Oh, absolutely.
Like they're tired of us being the world police or whatever.
Now, this ties into his claims about the Afghanistan withdrawal, which he, of course, calls a disaster.
Right.
He criticizes Biden for pulling out troops before civilians and equipment.
Yeah, leaving billions of dollars worth of military hardware behind for the Taliban to parade around with.
And, the Afghanistan withdrawal was such a sensitive topic for a lot of people.
Right, yeah.
Many saw it as a failure of leadership, a betrayal of our allies.
Right.
And Trump tapping into that anger and disappointment could definitely appeal to certain voters.
Especially those who already have a negative view of Biden's foreign policy.
Right. He wants them to believe that under his leadership, that kind of chaotic withdrawal wouldn't have happened. He even tells this story about asking a military child whether soldiers should be evacuated first or last,
Wow.
with the child correctly answering last.
Okay.
It's a simple but effective anecdote, right?
Yeah.
Implying that even a child understands basic military strategy better than Biden.
Yeah, it plays into that common sense approach that he likes to promote.
Exactly.
But let's be real, complex military operations like that aren't usually decided with simple yes or no answers.
Of course not, no.
There's a lot of nuance there.
But, simplicity can be powerful in politics.
Yeah.
And Trump is a master of boiling down these complex issues into these digestible sound bites.
Yeah.
And sometimes that resonates more than nuanced explanations.
Mm-hmm. And he then pivots to ISIS.
Okay.
Bragging about defeating them in a matter of weeks.
Right.
With the greatest generals.
Of course.
And the best planes, weapons, guns, and bombs.
He loves to emphasize American military strength.
Yeah, it's a theme that consistently runs through his policies and his rhetoric.
And it's a message that appeals to a large segment of the population.
Yeah.
Voters who value a strong military and see military action as a sign of leadership.
Right.
This is particularly relevant when you consider his claims about deterring China and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
He suggests that his departure from office emboldened both countries, leading to increased aggression towards Taiwan and the invasion of Ukraine.
So he's implying that if he were still president, Putin wouldn't have dared invade Ukraine.
Yeah, it's a bold claim.
Very bold.
And one that's difficult to prove or disprove.
Yeah.
But it feeds into the narrative he's building, right?
Right, the narrative of Trump as a peacemaker through strength.
Exactly.
And he contrasts that with Biden, who he portrays as weak and indecisive.
Yeah.
And that's a tactic that could sway voters who are concerned about global instability and who long for a leader who projects an image of unwavering strength.
Absolutely. And this image of strength isn't just limited to dealing with world leaders.
Okay.
He applies it even to his relationship with Kim Jong-un.
Ah, yes. Little Rocket Man.
He loves to bring up those tough talks, right?
Right.
Claiming that Kim eventually backed down because he realized Trump was serious.
Right. He wasn't going to back down.
He even compares their relationship to a UFC fight.
Oh, really?
Suggesting that, Kim was ready to tap out after realizing that Trump was the stronger opponent.
Wow. That's a vivid analogy.
It really is, and it plays into his whole alpha male persona.
And don't forget the bromance with Dana White, the UFC president.
Oh, yeah.
He mentions that White was always loyal to him, even when it wasn't popular.
Again, it's about emphasizing strength and loyalty, two qualities that resonate with his base.
And he even compares himself to heavyweight boxers.
Does he really?
Praising Tyson Fury's weave
Okay.
and comparing it to his own political maneuvering.
Wow.
So he seems fascinated by the physicality of boxing.
Yeah.
The brutality of it all. He even brings up Camille Roundtree's horrific injury in a fight against James Buster Douglas.
Oh, gosh.
It's a strange detail to include, but it's very much in line with his tendency to use graphic language and imagery.
Yeah, it's jarring, but it can also be effective. It cuts through the perceived polish of typical political discourse.
Right.
Creating a sense of rawness and authenticity.
And speaking of authenticity, he spends a good chunk of the interview railing against the media.
Right, calling them fake news.
Accusing them of distorting his words and his actions.
This is a key theme for Trump, right?
Otto.
He portrays himself as the victim of a dishonest and biased media, further solidifying his bond with supporters who already distrust mainstream sources.
Yeah, they think everyone's lying to them except for him.
Right, and he cites the very fine people hoax and the bloodbath hoax
Right.
as examples of media manipulation, claiming his words were intentionally twisted to make him look bad.
Yeah, it's all part of the conspiracy.
And then he points to the internet and shows like Rogan's as alternative sources of information.
Right, the places where people can hear the truth.
Yes, without the filter of the fake news media.
So this is a significant point to consider when we're analyzing the potential impact of this Rogan interview on his campaign.
Right, because he's reaching a massive audience.
Millions of listeners.
One that might not be exposed to his message through traditional channels.
And he even brags about his success on TikTok.
Does he really?
Claiming that he's gained 30 points with young people since joining the platform.
Interesting.
He says a Republican is usually down 30 points with young people, but he's now plus 30.
Now that claim about gaining 60 points seems highly unlikely.
Right.
I don't think there's any evidence to support such a dramatic shift.
Yeah, it sounds like hyperbole.
But it does highlight Trump's understanding of the power of social media, especially when it comes to reaching younger voters. He's a master of using these platforms to bypass traditional media and control his own narrative.
Yeah, he doesn't have to deal with those pesky reporters.
Exactly. And that can be such a powerful tool in an election.
Totally.
Especially when so much of the political discourse happens online now.
Yeah, everything's online.
Now, shifting gears a bit to a seemingly less controversial topic.
Okay.
Trump talks about his focus on Make America Healthy Again.
Make America Healthy Again.
A platform that emphasizes healthier food options.
Okay.
And criticizes the chemicals and ingredients that are allowed in American food that are banned in other countries.
So this is interesting.
It is.
He's tapping into growing concerns about food safety and quality.
Right. Positioning himself as a champion for everyday Americans against big corporations and government agencies that are perceived as failing to protect public health.
It's very much a populist message that aligns with his overall campaign strategy.
Exactly. He's the outsider fighting for the little guy against the powerful elites.
Right. And he even goes so far as to suggest that he's genetically predisposed to good health.
Oh, really?
Attributing his own good health to genetics and playing golf.
Okay, so what's his reasoning there?
He says golf provides fresh air, which is debatable.
Debatable, yeah.
But it's all part of projecting this image of vitality and strength.
Right. He wants voters to see him as physically and mentally fit to lead.
Right.
And it plays into the contrast he's trying to create with Biden, who he often portrays as old and frail.
He's always talking about how Biden can't even walk upstairs.
Right. He even jokes with Rogan about playing golf shortly after being shot in the ear during a campaign rally.
Oh, wow.
Implying that his commitment to the campaign outweighs any personal discomfort or risk.
Again, it's about creating that image of the tough tireless warrior,
Right.
willing to endure anything for his supporters and his mission.
Yeah, it's wild how he manages to weave all of these threads together.
Yeah.
You've got like the business savvy, the fighter mentality, that disdain for the elites, and this constant sense that America's being cheated or taken advantage of.
And I think that's really where his appeal lies, particularly for a specific type of voter.
Yeah.
You know, those who feel like they've been left behind, ignored by the establishment.
Right, they feel like no one's listening to them.
And they see in Trump someone who speaks their language.
Who isn't afraid to challenge the status quo, even if it means bending the truth or resorting to personal attacks?
Right, so this Rogan interview, with its millions of listeners, could actually be a huge boost for his campaign.
Potentially. I think so, because it allows him to bypass the filters of traditional media, which he constantly criticizes.
Right, he doesn't like the fake news media.
And connect directly with voters on his own terms.
It also gives him this platform to lay out his policy positions and attack his opponents, all within this casual, entertaining format.
Right, and I think that casual format is key.
Yeah.
You know, it makes him seem more relatable, less like a stiff politician and more like someone you might have a beer with.
Yeah, I could see that.
He's not afraid to crack jokes, to use colorful language, or even to delve into topics like aliens and conspiracy theories.
Which, you know, some people love.
Some people love it, yeah. And while that might alienate some voters, it endears him to others who are tired of political correctness and crave that kind of authenticity.
But we should be real here. A lot of what he says is highly controversial, if not outright false.
Yeah, of course.
He makes claims about election fraud.
Mm-hmm.
He attacks his opponents with little regard for facts and promotes conspiracy theories that have been debunked time and time again.
And that's the danger, isn't it?
Yeah.
By giving him this platform, Rogan is essentially amplifying those messages, potentially legitimizing them in the eyes of some viewers.
Yeah.
And this could further deepen the political divide,
Right.
making it even harder to have reasoned discussions about important issues.
So while this interview might be entertaining,
Yeah.
it's also a reminder of the challenges facing American democracy today.
Exactly.
You know, we're increasingly living in these echo chambers where our own beliefs are reinforced and opposing viewpoints are just dismissed as fake news or propaganda.
Mm-hmm. And that's a trend that Trump has certainly capitalized on, whether intentionally or not.
Right. He knows how to play the game.
He's a master of using social media and alternative media platforms to circumvent traditional gatekeepers and control his own narrative.
So what does all of this mean for you, the listener?
Good question.
Well, it means you need to be an informed and critical consumer of information.
Exactly.
Don't just accept what you hear at face value, whether it's from Trump or from anyone else.
Right. Do your own research, fact-check claims, and consider multiple perspectives.
There's always more to the story.
Always.
So remember, this deep dive was just a glimpse into Trump's mind, a taste of his policies and opinions.
Right. A starting point.
Exactly.
It's up to you to decide what you make of it, to determine whether his vision for America aligns with your own.
And I think that's what's so fascinating about this whole thing.
Yeah.
It's not just about politics.
It's bigger than that.
It's about understanding how people form their beliefs, how they interpret information, and how those beliefs shape our world.
Trump is a unique figure in American history, someone who has tapped into a deep well of resentment, anxiety, and longing.
Yeah, you can't deny his impact.
Whether you love him or hate him, there's no denying that he's a force to be reckoned with.
That's for sure.
And I think this Rogan interview is a reminder that the forces shaping American politics are complex, often contradictory, and constantly evolving.
Yeah, it's a wild ride.
As we move forward, it's crucial that we engage with these forces thoughtfully, critically, and with a willingness to listen to perspectives that might challenge our own.
Well said. I think that's a great place to leave it.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.